How do you see the growing influence of money in politics, and is it becoming a defining governance issue of our time?
So in the 1990s, democracy swept through Africa, and we really thought that new constitutions, credible elections, multi-party, active civil society, that these would all guarantee democratic processes that would represent citizens' interests. And I think what we're seeing now in a world where the inequality gap between rich and poor is increasing, it's money that's now determining who goes into politics, who stays in politics, and whose interests gets heard. And second of all, we know that if there's no state regulation or transparency, money begins to capture politicians, weaken state institutions, and then ultimately undermine the public interest. And so what we are seeing is the ability of ordinary citizens to have a voice becomes impeded, and it erodes the political legitimacy because financial power alone then begins to shape who competes, who wins, and in whose interests the government ultimately serves. And this is actually, for us, something that is a danger at the Open Society Foundations, because what we see is democratic accountability from citizens being shifted to private financiers, to wealthy individuals or corporations or special interests, and even foreign actors who can dominate political financing. And so what you see then is your political class is now no longer representing the electorate. It's more responsive to their corporate or other sponsors. This has another knock-on effect, actually, because it becomes a bar for entering politics, right? So across Africa now, going into politics is more expensive. And this makes it harder for historically excluded groups. So women, young people, candidates without wealthy backers to actually compete. So if we want democracy to remain open and representative, we have to pay close attention to how politics is financed and in whose interests politics is reflected in public decision-making.
Yeah. You talked about the gap between rich and poor, but my second question would be that there's a lot of attention in this political financing across the world. What's the driving momentum?
So one reason is that we also now know we have much stronger evidence of the harms that opaque political funding does to democratic space. So over the years across Africa, we've had think tanks and civil society organizations and state oversight institutions documenting how unregulated political finance erodes democratic process and progress, increases inequality, curtails rights. And so what we are seeing now is evidence that shows that opaque funding is undermining accountability, and it's barring the entry, as I said, of candidates without big money, and it's deepening inequality. But the good thing, I think, is that this evidence has now created a real momentum for practical reforms. So at the UN level, last year, basically, the UN Convention Against Corruption adopted a resolution on transparency in the funding of political party candidates and electoral campaigns. And so this is the first internationally agreed set of standards on transparency in political finance. And then actually even more encouraging, at the African level, at the continental level, the AU Advisory Board Against Corruption and the Pan-African Parliament is developing a model law on political financing to support implementation of the AU Convention on Preventing and Combating Corruption. So we're beginning to see within Africa the building of a normative framework that will now help governments to actually limit the takeover by political financing.